Ugh, bloody hell. People think this show is about cars. It isn't. Cars are just the excuse. The real story is people. The friendships, the memories, the roads, and the moments that stay with us long after the engines have gone quiet. Because in the end, it's never really about the machines. It's about the lifestyle built around it. Most modern cars are designed to protect you from the drive. The 1961 Chevrolet Corvette does exactly the opposite. It reminds you that driving was never meant to be convenient. It was meant to be memorable. You feel everything: the sound, the smell, the road, the machine, and somehow that makes every mile seem to matter more. It doesn't just take you somewhere. It makes the journey feel worth remembering. And perhaps nowhere understands that better than a quiet stretch of French road called the Circuit de Reims. Because some cars were made for the roads, and some roads were made for legends. People always ask me, whose Corvette is this? And I always give them the same honest answer. It's hers. My wife bought this 1961 Corvette for me, which is a dangerous level of support for a man with automotive problems. Now, despite having driven it exactly once, she still refers to it as my Corvette. And to be fair, she's right. The steering is heavy enough to qualify as an upper body training. There's no power anything, no comfort features, and driving it feels less like transportation and more like negotiating with machinery. So apparently, I'm not the owner. I'm just the caretaker, washing it, detailing it, maintaining it like a well-dressed groundskeeper with a tool roll. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. People love arguing whether Chevy borrowed from Ferrari in the early Corvette years. And honestly, with the 1961 and the 1962 cars, you can see why. The long hood, the low stance, the elegant proportions. It feels like American trying to speak fluent Italian. But was it a copy? It was Chevrolet building its own answer to the Ferrari glamour. Less opera, more bourbon, but still dangerous. There's a very specific line a man must walk when arriving somewhere in an old Corvette. You want confidence. You don't want to look like a man recently denied a jet ski rental. There's a difference. The car is already making a statement. You don't need to help it by dressing like you're negotiating child support in a parking lot of a lake resort. No, this requires restraint. A proper vintage racing windbreaker, jeans, good boots, sunglasses that suggest taste, not active probation. Because a great old Corvette doesn't need noise. It needs presence. The kind of presence that says, yes, this may be slightly unreasonable, and yes, that's precisely the point. There's a curious little ritual to waking up an old Corvette. It isn't like starting a modern car where you press a button and some silent computer politely agrees to participate. No, this is negotiation. First, a moment of respect. Check the shifter, because nothing ruins a gentleman's morning quite like launching himself through the garage wall before coffee. Radio off. Key just so. A slight pause, as if the car would like a moment to consider whether or not your requests are reasonable. And then the turn. That wonderful mechanical hesitation. The crank, the cough, the brief suspicion that perhaps today is the day she will choose violence. And then there it is, life. Not transportation, life. The whole machine wakes up like an old jazz singer clearing his throat before the first note. The hood shivers, the steering wheel trembles, the mirrors buzz with optimism and mild dishonesty. And suddenly, we're no longer in the present. The world softens. The radio takes its sweet time because in those days, even music understood anticipation. A little static, a whisper from another decade. And somewhere between the crackle and the melody, you're gone. Back when gas stations checked your oil, when a man wore a hat to dinner, when cars had curves, songs had saxophones, and flirting required actual courage. Even the advertisements sound happier, as if the entire country had agreed that maybe life should be enjoyed with the windows down. And for just a moment, sitting here with your hands on the thin steering wheel and old music floating through the warm speakers, it feels like time travel. Not perfect, not efficient, but infinitely better because some machines don't just take you somewhere, they take you back. It seems to me that the Corvette didn't start out as a fighter. It started as an idea, an American interpretation of a sports car, more about style than speed, presence more than performance. Early on, it didn't quite have the bite to match the look, but that didn't last. By the late 50s, it found its footing. V8 power came in, and suddenly, this wasn't just a car you admired, it was a car you felt. Then the 60s happened and everything changed because somewhere across the paddock, the Cobras arrived. Light, brutal, and unapologetic. And just like that, the Corvette had something to prove. By 1963, it wasn't chasing anymore. It was evolving, sharpening its edges, finding its voice, and becoming something a little more serious and a little more dangerous. By 1965, it came out swinging. Big power, big presence, a proper street fighter with real intent. By 1967, it wasn't just part of the conversation, it was in the trenches. And somewhere along that timeline, you start to understand why this matters. Because cars like this, they don't just belong in history, they pull you into it. I found myself chasing that same idea through my very own 427 powered L88 SCCA race car project. Not because it's logical and certainly not because it's easy, but because something about these cars demand to be experienced, not just remembered. There's a connection there between what they were and what we try to build today. A thread that runs from those early race circuits right into our garages. And you can feel that in this car. Started as an idea, becomes something else entirely. By 1967, it wasn't chasing cobras anymore. It was hunting. This episode is not sponsored, but should any respectable manufacturer of fine watches, driving shoes, jackets, hats, sunglasses, or dangerously expensive leather goods be watching, please understand, my body remains available for tasteful commercial alignment. A few years ago, my wife and I found ourselves in Champagne, France. Beautiful countryside, quiet roads, the kind of place that makes you slow down. But just outside of town, there's something else. An old race circuit, Reims. Faded signs, old guardrails, a timing tower just sitting there like it had been waiting. And then it all starts to come into focus. Grandstands, abandoned fuel stations, pit structures from another era. The fabled Reims circuit. And it didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like the world had simply moved on and this place had decided to stay exactly as it was. We got out and started walking around. There's something about being in a place like this, hollow ground. You don't hear engines anymore, but somehow you still feel them. You can almost picture it. Cars flat out down those long straights, drivers balancing courage and consequences, crowds pressed in close, and now just wind and quiet, but not forgotten. Because every so often you'd hear something in the distance, a flat six, an Alfa Romeo, something alive, and a group of car enthusiasts would appear. A mix of modern and vintage machines moving through a place built for something older, pulling in, taking photos, standing around, talking and laughing. Places like this don't disappear. They don't lose their meaning. They just wait for the next group of people who understand what they were and still feel what they are, lost in time, but not forgotten. You know, some people collect cars, some people collect watches, some collect homes, some collect things just to point at and say, look what I've built. And there's nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was collecting something else. Roads, conversations, and friendships. The people who show up because of the machine and stay because of something far more important. This 1961 Corvette isn't really about chrome, horsepower, or whatever the judging sheet says is correct. It's about what happens around it. The stories, the laughter, the people standing beside it. Because the older I get, the less interested I am in perfect cars, and the more interested I am in unforgettable people. That to me is the real collection, not the machines or the memories attached to it. Because in the end, nobody remembers what ratio was in the rear end. They remember who handed them the keys, who sat in the passenger seat, who stayed too late at the table telling stories about the drive. That's the part worth protecting. That's the part worth building. So no, I don't think about collecting cars. I think about collecting people. And honestly, I think that's the better investment. To good roads, good friends, and the stories that follow us home. We'll see you next week.